So let's start. Hello, I'm Sarah Miltai, Activities Chair of the Young Academy of Europe, and welcome to the first part of our new event series, Arts and Science, Mutual Creativity and Inspiration. In a nutshell, the idea is to explore how science inspires art and art inspires science. And I would like to start by thanking, obviously, Marjolein for finding solutions to all our technical problems, and the Vice Chair of Young Academy of Europe, Scott Bremer and Katalin Solomosi, for their huge help and support in putting this event program together. So today we have two excellent speakers for this topic, Marjolein Pijnappels, I would guess, from Wondermash, Netherlands, and Ofer Feinerman from Weizmann Institute, Israel. Marjolein is a future ecologist who draws inspiration from techno, bio, and mythology to connect, challenge, and start dialogues towards creating future stories for organizations to facilitate developing innovative long-term strategies and visions. And Ofer is a physicist shedding light on the collective behavior of ant colonies, who writes a comic book to communicate his research. In a few minutes, we will hear about their journey of successfully combining arts and science to inspire others and be inspired by them. Each talk will last 15 minutes, following a 5 minutes of Q&A session. Please do not be shy in asking questions and sharing your comments. You can write on the chat box or simply turn on your mic and ask. We will have an additional 20 minutes of discussions, and we encourage everyone to join and share ideas, their experiences with arts and science, combining arts and science, and if they have, they can share their comments. So, Marjolein, thank you very much for being here. Let's hear about anastomosal science.
Yeah, thank you, Sarim. And I'm so happy this worked with the Jitsi link. It's such an easy way, I find, to quickly get together. So without any further delays, hopefully I will share something that I prepared for today. Let me see if I can just share the window of my presentation. Do you see this full screen now? Because I see it really small myself, but that's not a big problem.
Yeah.
Good. So I want to start with, like, today I'm going to talk.
Yeah. We see the presenter's view, actually.
Okay. So you see all my notes. Is this better?
Yes.
You see the whole, only the slides, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So
it doesn't pop up.
For you, it doesn't pop up?
I see it large.
I see it large.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's good. So what I want to do is sort of challenge you a little bit and share my ideas about science and how I sort of merge all of these things into my own practice. And I have some questions in the end, and I would really hope for you to have some questions for me and sort of discover these other ways maybe of doing science. And why I call this Anastomosal science will also become clear during my talk. So this quote is by the Colombian American anthropologist Arturo Escobar. And he says, we must sentipensar, which is a new word, meaning feel, think. We must sentipensar new notions about what is real and thus what is possible. And what I like about this quote is that it speaks, it's a part of his book, Pluriversal Politics. And it elaborates on this concept, the pluriverse, which is quite a new concept. And it means, it basically means that there are multiple worlds fitting into this one world that we live in. And it doesn't mean this in like a quantum physics, parallel universe kind of way, but in a real, like, practical way, embodied way. So Escobar, who's a professor of anthropology in North Carolina, he highlights how today there's like one dominant world system, which has many names, but you could call it like the modern or capitalist or heteropatriarchal colonial world system. The system many of us, at least I, grew up in and live in. And especially if, like me, you grow up in this world, you think it's the only way to be and that the whole world works like this. But obviously that isn't so. So Escobar makes a case for diversifying the way we look into design is his field, but also different ways, alternative ways of being, living, and also alternative ways of doing science. So for me, I started out as a marine ecologist. That's where I did my master's in. I worked as a climate change researcher. I had a design agency in information design for 12 years.
No, veig això tota l'estona. No veig les diapos.
I don't know who has the microphone on, but maybe you can turn it off. It's a bit, thank you. Now I work as a futures ecologist, which basically just is a word I thought captures what I do now, is helping these organizations by creating future stories that are nested in relationships rather than in technologies. So the future is sort of a mirror that I cast back at society to look at the way we do things now. So not future thinking to create a perfect future, but futures thinking to reflect on what we do now. So to introduce my ideas and tell you what it's all about, I give you the example of time and the way we think about time. And with we, again, I'm talking from like my own situatedness, my own perspective from a modern world or Western world perspective. So we have linear time. We live today and we move in a sort of a straight arrow into the future. It's how we imagine time often in our heads. So there are different ways of understanding time than as an arrow or a straight line. So for some Arab-speaking people, the future actually moves in the other direction. So the future is before them and the behind them, and the past is before them. In Buddhism, time is cyclical. And then there's quantum physics, where time moves both ways. And there's this species of jellyfish where time sort of moves back and forth. They rejuvenate, turn into their younger selves as they move like from adult jellyfish to larvae jellyfish, and they sort of move back and forth through time. So linearity and unidirectionality is just it's not just in our sense of time, but also in the way we do our science, as if there's one way of doing our science right. So to illustrate this, I've taken a deep dive in my favorite species, which are octopi, and sort of which I think is familiar to you, like the scientific method. It's scientific thinking, it's hypotheses, it's testing, it's objectivity, data collection, data analysis, etc. And we try to find out some sort of truth or some sort of understanding of how the world around us works. And as a marine ecologist, you might study marine animals and think about their communication styles, but maybe also their evolution or their specific genetics, or those are questions that science tries to answer. And then there are these other kinds of questions, maybe questions from more the arts and social sciences, or maybe even outside of academia, like what's it like being an octopus, or what can we learn from them, or how do we emote with octopi? Can we build relationships with octopi? Which was something like I also did an internship with monkeys, with macaques. And it was, you couldn't say that you liked the monkeys or you wanted to build a relationship with the monkeys as a biologist, because that was unprofessional. It wasn't what science does. But those are questions that, humans have. And then there's a third sort of type of question that's not really like a question from the mind, but it's more answering things on an experiential level, a feeling or a sensing, and something that's maybe even more aptly expressed through art than through science, but it also helps us learn about our environment. So with octopi, they're so interesting because they have 9 brains. I'm not sure if probably cannot call them that, but they have neuronal centers in their arms, and they operate partially independent from the central brain in the head. So they can view their own arms as self and other. So what's it even like to be an octopi? Can you understand that by studying it and collecting data, or should you sort of try experiencing that? So anastomosal science, it sort of uses nature as a metaphor, fungi specifically as a metaphor for a more rooted and interrelational science. So if you look at biomimicry, it's just sort of very up and coming field, especially in architecture, where we use nature and try to mimic it and learn lessons from that. There's another form of mimicry, which officially I think is known as weak biomimicry, that doesn't literally translate science or nature to concepts, but more tries to understand the relationships, the ecological relationships in nature, and how we can become a part of that again, or make ourselves aware that we are a part of that again. And that is what anastomosal science is about. So what is anastomosis? It's basically a branching off and a fusing together of a something. So blood vessels, for example, they don't just branch out like leaves or branches of a tree, but they come together as well. Same with rivers or corals or fungi. So what's interesting there is that it's not a straight line, it's not a straight path, it's anything but. And it makes us understand science as not a straight line from something unknown to something known, but maybe as one mode of knowledge creation or understanding of the world around us. So we tend to think of science, or at least that was my experience working in academia, as sort of the top way of understanding the world, objective, fact-based, standing the test of time. And if there was any acknowledgement of other types of knowledge creation, they were sort of hierarchical categorized. So you have indigenous knowledge systems and philosophy, social sciences, which as a scientist, I felt that many scientists sort of thought they were the better researchers in those, like there's a hierarchy in academia and outside of that as well. And then there's things like mythology, spirituality, imagination, which many probably wouldn't consider true knowledge as well, but maybe like a fantasy. But I'm here to argue that maybe it's time to broaden that perspective. So anastomosis is not necessarily a different way of doing science, but it's a way to re-entangle science with other ways of sense making and knowledge creation. So, for example, if you take the fungi as a structure, science is maybe somewhere on a crossroads, but there are different pathways that influence each other in two directions. So not just ours influencing science, but also science influencing ours, and vice versa. So also this means science as organic and not mechanistic, meaning that the modern world has a very mechanistic view of the world. We started taking animals apart and studying different compartments, like the neuronal system and the hormonal system, or the air-lung system. So we sort of break apart all these different parts of what, for example, an animal, but also like a natural ecological system is like, and we study them separately. There's also the spaceship Earth analogy, which is a concept from, I think, the 70s that depicts Earth as a spaceship with a crew, humans steering the spaceship on a finite resource base. And it was meant to have people become aware of the finite resources that we have, and that we should be more careful with Earth. But it also made worse this sort of technological view of Earth as a technological entity that, as long as we know exactly how to fine-tune it, we can make it work. And it also really centralizes humans in this story, which is, of course, one, but only one of the species inhabiting Earth. So another idea is that Earth is a giant organism, which was put forward, amongst others, by Lynn Margulis, the evolutionary biologist, who was ridiculed for it. And still, the Gaia hypothesis is not something that's it's very controversial in the scientific community. But Lynn Margulis also had another controversial theory, the endosymbiosis theory, that stated that, amongst others, how like the eukaryote cell came to be with our nucleus and mitochondria and everything else, but also how the driving force for evolution was not just struggle and competition, but also cooperation. So whether or not this is a theory that can or should be proven, it's a perspective, just like the spaceship Earth, that makes us think differently about our systems, especially our like the biggest, well, not the biggest system, but the biggest meaningful system for us as a species, our Earth. I also want to touch quickly, extending this view on a pluriversal and queer worldview. It just means that we become aware of the different perspectives that shape even our objectivist of objective research. So an example is that birdsong has been studied for a long time and considered an almost exclusively male trait, mimicking in a different way, human mimicking the human organization of society, where men have been like the most dominating or most present life force in the human communities, and also specific traits that were attached to men versus women. So song was something that was thought of as exclusively male. And even in the objective methodologies, this was remained established. But when different methodologies were used, or when specifically researchers were made aware of these biases, it was found that I think in 75% of bird species, female song plays an important role, and that female song was present in the ancestral bird, for example. So this just shows that it's not always possible to see your specific perspectives and where you might not be objective. But if you take a pluriversal view where you take different standpoints, you can sort of understand the world through different glasses or different perspectives, and that broadens your understanding of the world and your knowledge of the world. So finally, I want to touch on the multi-species science as an idea that I just want to hold against you. So we said in this spaceship Earth view, where humans are steering the planet, we are becoming more and more aware that, of course, we are a part of the ecosystem. It influences us as much as we influence the system that we are a part of. But most of all, if we take this human-centric view, we miss a lot of the things going on. So for the longest time, fungi, which is a picture of the underground mycelium, they were not viewed as important. I think they saw them as plants, originally put fungi in the plant kingdom. And humans didn't realize that most of what fungi do is invisible because it's underground. And because we didn't see it, it wasn't deemed important, or we couldn't study it. But in fact, we realize now that fungi have taken a very important role in shaping the earth, and even now have a very important role in balancing the earth system, and might lead to intricate new solutions if we do take them into account. So these invisible worlds, like the fungi, can be made visible through science. So this is a diagram, a top view diagram of a transect with, I think, Douglas firs, some kind of fir tree. The green dots are the trees. And then all the lines are mycelium growths connecting trees to other trees, communicating, sending out nutrients. And they made researchers are aware that there are certain trees that are hubs that are very important connecting points, and very important even for trees that stand like kilometers away. So if you look at this view, you can think of the fungi and the trees as subjects for studies, test subjects maybe, but you can also view them maybe as participants, or could we even view them as scientists or researchers themselves? So if you look at this, I'm not sure if this will play. I'm going to try and see if you can see this. It's a bit blurry, but it is a slime mold. It's a fungi. And it's a map of the Tokyo area railway system that is being created by the fungus by highlighting the stations with food, and the central Tokyo Central Station with a big, where it's starting from. And the fungi actually, I would say calculate, but it's not how a fungi works, but it actually grows in such a way that it makes the most efficient Tokyo railway station map. So they could be active participants in projects, possibly. So introducing you to this anastomosal science idea, it's important to ask questions like, what would this look like, feel like, sense like? And of course, I gave you some ideas, but I'm also interested in new ways of doing science. Possibly, is it even possible to study something if you don't break it down into components? Avoiding unification into a single theory of everything that was so much sought after and still is by some people, and instead honor the entanglements and complexities. and also interested in your ideas about how it's possible to work with other actors, other, well, scientists or researchers across species. So these are some of the ideas that I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and see if there's any questions for now, or that we first move on to the next presentation. I don't know what the best plan to go ahead is.
Well, we can have a short 5 minutes of question and answer session, if there are any. I have some questions, but I would like to first hear it from our audience. You can write in the chat or just unmute and ask. If not, maybe I can continue. So it was very interesting to categorize different kinds of knowledge from maths and from spirituality, maybe religion and science. And I mean, they are all based on the experience and observations, but they are looking at different things. Scientists look at the facts, and the other people look at feelings, maybe hunches, or the past experience of their ancestors. So how do you suppose they will talk with each other? They will understand each other, because these are normally historically doesn't get well.
Yeah. I get it, and I think that's a very I think that's for me where it gets interesting, just because it's so hard to build these bridges and to get people to see their different point of view. And I think there was this researcher I talked to over Zoom a couple of months ago, and he's studying this ecological calendar in the mountains of Afghanistan. And he's an anthropologist, and he started out a very, well, researchery, categorizing, understanding the whole system. And then he found, for example, that something else was going on, that besides these calendars guiding the life of the people there, telling them when to do their agriculture, when to get the cattle in for winter, there was also another element, and he calls it the element of the sacred. But he had a very difficult time communicating this concept and studying it and understanding it in the scientific community. So in the end, he decided to write an article about it just under his own name, because he was the professor and no one could touch him, something like that he said. Because I think science does try to study things objectively and study facts. But I also think that by framing science and facts as something that you can prove using the scientific method, because that's what you do, you miss a lot of other things that are still really real. And that's what I see happening, is that things such as indigenous knowledge or embodied knowledge, which is much harder to make explicit in a standardized way, in a way that can be repeated in experiments, is seen as not there. And I think where people can start understanding and talking each other is if you approach your science as a person, which sound a bit crazy, but I think everyone has these bigger or smaller embodied truths or embodied knowledges and things that we know are true, even if there's not a specific evidence for. And if you understand that that is how the world works, then in tiny ways, I think we can, without retracting from the scientific method, which is important, but understanding that it is just one, but it's one way of understanding the world. And there are other ways, and you already are experiencing these ways.
Thanks a lot. Maybe we can follow up on this topic in the discussions part, because it is very interesting, but we should now move to Ofer as our second speaker. So Ofer, thanks a lot again for being here. We're looking forward to hearing your comic book, The Anteater's Culinary Guide. We can see the screen, but you have to unmute yourself. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you can hear me as well.
We can hear you. Now you have to share your presentation.
Now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay. So thank you, Scott and Serene, for inviting me. Really interesting and fascinating. So I'd like to tell you about my comic book in the writing. So actually it's joint endeavor with Udi Fonio, who's in my working with me in my lab, and illustrator Sarit Barnard, who did all the illustrations you'll see, except for the first few slides. Okay, it's not moving. Yeah, here. Okay, so I'll also start like a bit like Marjolein on the large scale of the current atmosphere, which is a bit feeling catastrophic in our world in the past few years, and also in Israel, where I come from, and of course there's many factors, but I'll just try to say one of them. And this is this kind of a loss of grip on reality. So you see a child here, because our book is directed at children finally. But we know that first children spend more and more time on their screens, less and less time outside, interacting with the real world. And second, what you see on the screens is becoming more and more problematic in many ways. Because you don't know what to believe anymore, right? There's this fake news, and a lot of the news is bot news, etc. And soon you have this artificial intelligence coming in. So again, it's more of a disconnect from reality. You don't know what to believe anymore. And there's nothing firm to grab, and right, and this has an effect on how we see the world and on science, which is a way of looking at the world. And science has its own problem, right? Because modern science, it's quite difficult. It's difficult to explain it to a kid. Most kids don't know enough to understand too much about how the screen in front of them works, for example. So it's one problem. It's very difficult to explain science. You have to take your time, etc. And second, in this kind of atmosphere where all you never know what it's true, and everything somebody utters has the same weight as everything anybody utters, right? So if you want to understand science, and you have to take the scientist's word for it, this word is not worth more than any other thing that anybody tells you. And this is turning into a big problem, I think, and we see it today in Israel. In Israel, we have this kind of, the government is kind of trying to go towards a dictatorship, and there's a lot of professionals, scientists, economists, and from any kind of field of knowledge that are really calling out against this step that the politicians are taking. But because all words are equal, there's the professional people, the people who study this all their life, their word doesn't matter any more than any other kind of word that any politician seeking power would say. And this is you see this is a big thing in Israel today. How the word of any professional, also military professionals, for example, is actually worthless. And then has no meaning and can easily be put down. And this comes to all the way to the fact that people, or half of the population, or a huge fraction of the population, are actually voting in the elections to lose their voting powers. We see this kind of demonstration of these people here who are stepping on on the picture of the Israeli Supreme Court judges, which are actually there to keep their power against the authorities. So something bad is happening, and I think it's not only in Israel, and we know it from many countries in Europe and in North America. So there is this kind of thing, and one solution or one way to go at it, especially now in Israel when it's a time of emergency, and that things will happen in the next month, 5 weeks, is of course protest and go to the streets and try to fight it. Okay, but this may help the power struggle, but it does not help the specific problems that I spoke of in the beginning, of this loss of grip on reality and the loss of grip on or this equivalence of anything that anybody says. So second solution, which is probably much more effective than the first one, I'm just kidding, of course, is this book that we're writing, and you see here the first version that has all the pages. This picture I took maybe 2 weeks ago. You see the cover is still not the cover yet. Is to see if we can, in our small power, contribute to the education and try to solve these problems, which I think are quite universal, that I stated in the first slide. So what is in this book? So the book, let's talk about the setting. The book takes you from this huge disintegrating world or bad politics. It takes the child, the reader, into the familiar environment, into its neighborhood. It's familiar, but it's outside, right? It's not on the screen. So the book will does promote leaving the screen to go outside. And then we have the main characters of the book. This girl, which is very Israeli, you can see by the way she's dressed, she's called Enav, and her friend, which is almost surely an imaginary friend, I think. She's called Monica, she's an anteater. So these are the two characters kind of to relate, the kid can relate to, and these are the two characters that help us pass between this large scale world of the neighborhood to the smaller scale world of the ants. The characters, just because due to what Marjolein said, I will also say they have some different traits, and one of them is more scientific, maybe the girl. The other one more imaginary, uses more her imagination. And this is the anteater. She's also imaginary herself, actually, and she comes from the imagination of the kids. So there's also this mix and this thing happening in the book, which I won't talk too much about, but just because Marjolein mentioned it. And then we focus. Okay, so these characters help us go from this large world of the neighborhood, the buildings, and the familiar environment, into the small world, which is also there, but many kids do not notice it, and we introduce it. This is the world of the ants, and the ants are just fantastic, amazing natural phenomena, animal behavior phenomena, that you don't have to go to Africa, and you don't have to go to Antarctica or wherever to see it. It's right here under our feet. Okay, it survived the urbanization, which is also good, and in our kind of changing environment and world, you can still see an amazing piece of science, piece of nature, right here, just under your feet. So the book is the goal of the book is to I don't have the word, but to take the kid and show him, introduce him to what's there, just under her feet. Okay, so from that, so this is what we want to do. We want to have kids look at the ants, which are very approachable, and go from there. And how do we do it? So again, we want to attract the kids. We want this to be very different from a school book. the schools in Israel are a lot, because I think it's because of the testing system, etc. It's a lot about reciting and remembering facts and reading pages and then knowing to write them back. So we want this to be as far as possible from a school book in the way we present the book. So to be as disconnected as possible. We don't want it to look like a school book or a study book, and therefore the medium we chose is a comic book. So you see, it's still not colored. So now we're actually just before the coloring stage. So it's a graphical novel. It tells you the story of these characters. I'll tell them a little bit about it soon. So they have some adventures. They have their relationship between them, jokes, etc. And you travel along with these characters between the story and then the stuff that's happening between them and the world of the ants, which is also available to the reader herself. So the main story, just very quickly, I'll say that the Anteater Monica, she comes from Brazil. So the first chapter is in the airport, and this is part of the first chapter. So she comes here, but she doesn't know what she can eat here, right? Because she's used to the ants in Brazil, but she doesn't know the ants in Israel. So she has a problem. What can she eat? That she doesn't eat the human food. And when posed with this problem, then enough that the girl says, of course, we have tons of ants in Israel. Who hasn't seen ants? And they go on to search for what this anteater can eat. Hence the title of the book. So they go out on each chapter. They go out. And at some point, right, things happen to them, all kinds of things and adventures and games, and etc. And at some point, they encounter the ants. And after they encounter the ants, actually, we step away from the comic book for a bit. And usually we give an ID card of the ant, which is something like this. It's actually an ant that has two casts. So we give the ID of the card of the ant. So first you can see more about how complex the ants are. If you compare ants from different chapters, you can see how different they are. And you get some information about how to find this ant outside. So we took only like the most common ants in Israel, which are quite easy to find. So you will know that now that we're going into the experiment stage, you will know that you're actually on the correct ant, you're doing it on the correct species. So you have the information here. I didn't translate it. To help you find these ants. And then we go, the book moves from the comic to experiments. And the experiments, this is one experiment which I think very, very nicely shows the feeling of the experimental sections in this book. First, it's a very simple experiment. So you can do it yourself. I don't know if you ever did. You can find an ant trail. You take a cardboard box, right? You put, I don't know if you see my cursor, but you cut a small door here, and also on the other side, you make many holes in this box so there's light inside, and you put it over the trail, and then you peek inside, and you see what happens to the ants. Do they get confused by the fact that they're covered by the box, or maybe they keep on walking in the same direction, etc. Okay, so actually, so this is what you see here, and you see that Einav is actually doing the experiment, but we do not say what she sees. You cannot see the cardboard box here blocks what she sees, and this is the way the experiments are and the whole book. It's like the idea behind the book. We don't give the answers. We give the questions. We introduce the questions, the main questions. But we don't give the answers. So there's very few answers coming from us, the authors, the scientists, or whatever. There's no talking ants or anthropomorphized ants, because that's not how things happen in nature. You cannot just ask ants question, or the ant cannot come and explain to you, or you cannot make yourself small like in many books and then go into the ant colony and see into the ant nest, see what happens. Okay, so we keep it very realistic. We don't give answers. instead we give these questions. The materials and the experiments are very simple. Like you see here, take a cardboard box, put it over an entrail, very cheap. And then we ask we motivated the child to observe. Okay, we offer some manipulations like putting this box, and to reason about what he sees, and to trust themselves. Okay, so the ants, because it's so approachable, you don't need too much. You can use your own logic, your own reasoning. You can start to trust yourself and then build ideas, because every child, and I think every one of us, is actually a scientist. Of course we are, otherwise we would bump into the walls and fall off the side of the buildings. We're all scientists, we can all reason. We just have to be shown it and encouraged to do it. So this is the way that the experiments happen. And another thing I wrote here is respect the ants. So there's a lot of respect for the ants, that we don't harm them, and we don't kill ants, and we don't let ants fight, or we don't dig the nests during the book. But also as you look more and more at the ants' behavior, you respect them more and more. And then there's about 100 experiments in this book. So it's like 160 pages of a book, with 80 pages of comics and 80 pages of experiments, more or less. So there's a lot of experiments and ideas and activities also to do on different species and different behaviors, because ants are so diverse and so interesting. And then at the end of the story, it goes like each chapter goes back and forth a little bit between the story and experiments. So you kind of go along with the characters as they look at the ants, and you do the experiment yourself instead of them. And at the end of each chapter, for whatever reason, the ants were too busy or too cute or too very smart, and they have to do something, etc. For some reason, the anteater does not actually eat the ants that they found. And this moves us to this is the driving force that moves us to the next chapter, where they actually go and look for the next species, which will probably be tastier, etc. And this moves the book forward until the ending, which I won't say for now. And hopefully the book will be ready and printed and out by spring. And that's it. Just to thank Udi, the co-writer, and Sarit Barnard, the illustrator. You have her if you want to see her full work, you have her site address here. Yotam Schwimmer, which is the editor, and the people who helped us with getting the money, which I should really thank the Weizmann environment for this. So it's the Berginski family that have a fund here for science and art, and further help from Professor Pilpel and Professor Moses. So thank you for listening, and I'll be happy to discuss or tell more or answer questions.
Looking forward to its publication.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting that you choose the comic book as a format. I mean, as a Turkish scientist, I understand that most of the things in politics and social life doesn't make sense when you look at people's choices and the polls and etc. So we are one step ahead of Israel now. But
yes.
And as a scientist, you feel the urge that, I mean, you cannot do anything for those people, but you at least can do something about the younger generations. But why comic book? Why would it be a comic book format?
Yeah. So the first thing again is to try to make what I said is to try to make it very different from a school book. So school book, usually the science is not interweaved with a story or with adventures, etc. So we want to make it different, kind of maybe trick the kids, because in their mind study is boring, and so this is one thing. And the second thing, a lot of this book is about observation, and therefore we wanted it to be very visual. So we wanted also in a very visual way to take the child from, okay, this is how you know this is your neighborhood, and so to take you very visually from this large world that you know, and which is kind of cruel sometimes, unfortunately, and help you zoom in really visually with the characters to the small scale, to the ants that are there. And once you find them, and once you notice them, then there's a lot to do. Like, it's an amazing natural phenomena, approachable. You need a box, a string, and then whatever, and you can already do a lot as a child. So I'm hoping it can have this effect to draw them in. Like, also children really like a comic book today, right? It's the visual, right? A very visual generation. So it's a way of getting to them as well.
Wonderful. Do we have other questions from the audience? Scott?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ofer. I really appreciated your talk, and I thought it was such a nice parallel with Marjolein. I was thinking of Marjolein is about, you know, creating the conditions for seeding science with other ways of looking at the world, including, you know, like the perspective of different animals and how would it be for them to participate in the world. And then I really appreciated yours, Ofer, in terms of the conditions for helping integrate science into other ways of seeing the world. So at the moment we seem to be kind of bombarded with, as you say, populism and things like this. And here is a very nice way in which you can reconnect people with the natural world and give them kind of real concrete ways that they can interact with the non-human species around them as well. So I really appreciated that. I think that was fantastic. More of a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think you really connected. Nice to Marjolein's talk on different levels, and just as you say now, yeah. So it's also within the characters of the book, but really, yeah. I never thought of it like this, but really, it's kind of like in this stormy world that we live in today. Maybe we can find in another species a point to latch onto. At least the kids can latch onto and get some stability, something, okay, real. This is real. We don't know what is real, but here, this is real. Now we can think. Now we can learn what thinking means. Coming to your own conclusion, trusting yourself, and that's it. Yeah.
So I think Marjolein wants to say a few words.
Yeah, I wanted to add that what I love about your project is also, I think you said it in the beginning, the scientific process and science in general. It can be explained really easily as sort of really flat, like this is the way the world is. But when that's not how science operates, and it's sometimes very difficult to explain to people like that. Science catches up with itself, but that's like because it's a process. It's not like this is the world, and then people get very confused when a couple of years later something that they thought was true is sort of refuted again. And I think it's really nice to in a playful way where people learn more the scientific method themselves, or children learn that in a small way, like observation and comparison, and understand that, of course, if you do 100 observations, you see something. If you do 5 more, you might catch something else, and you can never observe everything all the time. So it's always like, and that might not be explicit. I mean, I assume it's not very explicit in the book, but I think that storytelling is such a nice way to have people understand this by doing it. And it would be good for adults to learn this as well, not just to understand science, but to sort of familiarize themselves with, okay, how can I observe the world? How can I be attentive to like these small things around me that are so important in the whole keeping the world together. So just more of a, not a question per se, but I really love the project as well.
Thank you.
So Scott, maybe I should leave the word to you for the discussions.
Thanks, Jerem. So what we'd anticipated would that be we'd have some time now to kind of share some more of our views on this, how other ways of knowing, other ways of experiencing the world, for example, through art, find their way into science, and vice versa. And we've had 2 fantastic presentations on that. I also know that we're now over time already, and that stems from our technical problems at the very beginning. So, mea culpa. But no, so I know that some of you will need to dash, but I would just open it up as well to the rest of the the group here, if they want to kind of share any examples, any of the participants, people that have been listening today, feel free to come in and talk about ways in which you see that other ways of knowing kind of are able to be kind of find their way into science, and how we can channel science into ways of experiencing the world. I actually have one question that I wanted to pose to both you, Marjolein and Ofer, while other people are maybe thinking, and again, I'm aware of the time, but what do you think are good conditions for enabling this cross-pollination, if we call it that, or this kind of ability to enrich science with other ways of knowing, and vice versa? Marjolein, would you like to go first?
Yeah. Yes. I think getting together like this, but preferably in person, and talking about these things and showing what we're doing, building these relationships with other than scientists, but who have like a similar topic or close at heart, and building these trust relationships where you might, because I know that what I show today is for probably some people confusing. It's not the whole picture. It's just a small introduction to these ideas, and it raises a lot of questions. But I find that when you work longer, a lot of these ideas are already, inside of you, but maybe in different words, and you can use them as sort of a starting point. And one quick example that I have, it's not from science, but from policy making. Also a very a society that's also looking for new ways to, build these societies where everything is going to whatever crises here and there. And there's this water board in the Netherlands. We have water boards, so we have an extra layer of government exclusively for water, and they're very blue, if that's the right word, like very policy minded and not too crazy, especially in the Netherlands. And they actually had a voice for the river at the water board, at one of the water boards. So they have this empty chair at meetings where people can represent the voice of the river, and it's very intuitive. It sounds very maybe out there, but it works. And these people are asked to think about the river as an entity that might also have a say or an opinion. And by doing that, they sort of make different decisions. And I think for science, it could work like that as well. But you'd have to build this trust where things are not immediately shut down as crazy or as unrealistic or as too hypothetical. You have to get people together on actual projects that work together for a longer period of time, and that's when these things happen.
That's such an interesting example, the empty chair, that then various kind of spokespeople, I guess, whether they're standing for nature conservation or whether they're standing for river users, perhaps, we could go and sit at that chair and speak for the river. I really like this. Ofer, do you have any ideas on this? Conditions that nurture this kind of interaction, diversity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think usually you need very close relation between the scientists and the artists. So there has to be a lot of has to be like face to face, and I think some kind of common goal. At least we had here this common goal, which is kind of an educational goal. So it was not an artistic goal or not a scientific goal to begin with, but it brought us together just to have this very concrete thing. We have this book, we have to now go through with this book. And I think it was very important. It was not to have just 5 minutes on email or whatever but to have some kind of project that you have enough time to interact, enough time for things to grow. And I can say that also